So this is 216. It's a continuation of what we were doing. I know at the end of each unit, there are a bunch of review exercises, but they've added on an optional lesson with GUIs, graphical user interfaces. And in Java, one way that we can access GUIs is by using swing. It's one way. There are many different ways, but we're going to be using swing here. And it starts off by saying, if you use a language like App Inventor before this class, or Thunkable, I use that in my intro computer science class, so that way you can download apps that you make on your iPhone. App Inventor only allows you to download them currently on an Android device. But if you're ever interested in making apps, you can really do one of three things I would recommend: either using App Inventor, using Thunkable, or learning Swift. We're using Swing today. By learning Swift if you want to program for an iPhone. But with that, I'm going to continue here. If you guys hadn't learned App Inventor, that's fine. But it says if you use a language like App Inventor before, you're probably used to making a user interface, a UI, with buttons and other graphical components, things you can see and interact with and that look pretty, that a user can use. Java has a library called Swing, which is a graphical user interface toolkit that includes buttons and other standard graphical components. I'm not sure if I have a playlist that I created for Java Swing, but I definitely have one for Python and tkinter. tkinter is a graphical user interface you can use for Python. And I don't know if you guys are interested in graphical user interfaces. I'm not sure if I have one for GUIs in Java. It would have been a couple years ago that I did it, if I did. Okay. So it's a toolkit that allows us to use graphical components. Java Swing is not covered on the AP exam, but it is fun to use, and it's cool to be able to make things that you're able to interact with using buttons and labels and text boxes and radio buttons, and just being able to have something that you can click, right? Or even just enter information into. This lesson is an optional introduction to Java Swing and using its classes. Okay, so we're using Swing. Okay, Swing is a class that exists that we're able to access, or a library that exists that we're able to then easily create different elements and move from there. And we'll talk about each. It says the graphical components in Java Swing are all classes, and to use them, you must declare objects of those classes. In this lesson, we'll show you the following Swing classes. Now, I remember when I was a student in college and I was learning how to use a lot of these classes and libraries. My first reaction, I don't know why, it was just thinking that this is going to be hard, where really someone has done a lot of the work behind the scenes to make this incredibly easy for you. Okay, so a JFrame is just a window that contains, so if you think of like a window that pops up on your screen, that's a JFrame. And then a J button is just a button that can be clicked inside that window, right? And then a J label is just a label. If some of you took my web-based applications class, we dealt with some graphical user interface when we were going and using buttons in CSS and JavaScript allowed us to be able to design all of this and then add functionality to buttons when we click them. Okay, that's a whole different language. JavaScript's entirely different, but it says to use Java Swing, you usually need to import the following libraries. So at the very top of your program, you'd import these three. Okay, it says to set up a JFrame, which is your window, really the box that pops up on the screen, the window that pops up. In order to do that, it says you would declare an object of type JFrame, set its size in pixels, its layout, and make it visible. Okay, so you create a new frame, an object from the JFrame class. And if you add in quotation marks, my app, that's what the title of the JFrame is going to be. Okay. And we'll talk about, I'll show you all of this happening when we actually run this in the end. If you want to set the size of your frame, you can do frame.setSize. It'll be 500 pixels by 500 pixels. Okay, set the layout. If you add null, it's no value. And then if you set it visible to true, that makes it show up. Okay, and once you've created that JFrame, in the same way when we created turtles inside the world, we're going to create buttons inside of my JFrame. Okay, once you have a JFrame, you can create graphical objects like buttons and labels and add them to the JFrame. You can look up more information about these Java Swing components. Here's some more information, right? You can click there. All right, so we're creating a button called button1. Okay, and it's going to be an object, new object from the JButton class. And that button is going to say, click me on it. Okay, so we're passing this argument to this, all right? And then from there, we set the bounds. And you look at these numbers. Okay, we're going to talk about that later on, but this accepted 4 different arguments. And then, look, we're adding this button to the frame that we originally created by saying frame.add and then putting the button's name. Remember, the button's name is button1. If you set the layout of the frame to null, you must use set bounds. All right, we'll pass over that. Remember that the top left corner has the XY coordinates 0, 0. All right, the top left is 0, 0. Unlike when you have a coordinate plane, Cartesian plane, that 0, 0 is right in the middle. 0, 0 is in the top left. The bottom right corner has the actual size of your frame. So 500, 500 in this example. The width 100 and the height 50 are good sizes for most components. All right, so it looks like we have our button. Okay, we have set bounds. The X position is 10. The Y position is 10. The width is 100 and the height is 50, as it says right here. All right, so when we set the bounds, this 10 was passed as its X position, its Y position, so it moved right 10, down 10, and then the size of it is 100 pixels of the width and 50 pixels height. All right, some Java IDEs have GUI visual designers where you can drag and drop in and resize components. Reple, which we've been using, it's been asking us that, we've used it before in other classes. In this class, we can always use it if you would like to. It's an online IDE that exists, but it says in Reple, there is no GUI designer available. Okay, but it can display Java Swing GUIs. When creating a new Reple, you can choose Java Swing as the file type instead of just Java. So I can even make a separate video and we can explore that a little bit more if needed. It says, here's a Java Swing example on Reple that sets up a JFrame with a J button and a J label. The way we would create labels are very similar to how we would create buttons. Once you know how to create one element, it's just very easy to create similar elements or multiple elements. It calls a special method called AddActionListener. Okay, an AddActionListener, it listens or waits for an action to take place. So if you click on a button, usually when you click a button, it does something. If you click on a button on a website or click on a button in a program, it doesn't do anything, that's a problem. Typically, something is executed. A certain code is executed. So it says, can you add another button to it? Remember that you will need to create a JButton object, set bounds for it, and add it to the frame. Copy the AddActionListener code. All right, so first let's just run it, right? This is our code. I'll run it and then we'll see what it is and then we'll walk through and take a look at the code. So right now it's using Reple. and I ran my code. It took a while, and it will show up very slowly. All right, so now we have visuals. I'm a very visual person here. So let's just focus in on, see if I can zoom in here. Let's focus in on this. All right, so starting off, this is my JFrame. Okay, this is my JFrame. It then contains a button. The button I created was 50 pixels in height, 100 pixels in width. All right. And the title of this, it says My App. It says click me on it. So my JFrame and then a button inside of it. Let's look at the code and see exactly how this was created. All right. So first we imported these 3 lines, as it mentioned before. We have our main class. We have public static void main. All right. So we have our main method. We create a JFrame, and inside of it, check it out, it says My App in quotation marks. That's why it says My App as like the title. It created all of that. So just by saying frame equals new JFrame, that added this window. It added the minimize, maximize, Xing out of something, closing. It added this little picture in the corner that if you, this little icon, if you really want to change it, you can. We're not going to get into that though. Okay, we set the size of the window to 500 by 500, and we set layout to null. Then we create a button and a label. The label, I guess I can't see here. Excuse me. But the J button was called Hello Button. And inside of it, it says click me. And if I scroll down and look inside of it, it says click me. That's where you enter its text. All right. And then we created an output label. It says new J label. So maybe if I click the button, the label will pop up. So I click the button and it says hello world. So there's my label. Let's see how it actually worked. When I clicked that button, there was an action listener that then executed a certain line of code. So we set the bounds of our button. So look, the location of it was 100, 100. So we moved 100 to the right, 100 down. And then the width was 100 of my button and the height was 50. So it took 4 arguments. And then for my label, we went to the right 100, and then look, it says 200. So we went down 200 so that my label started down here. And then my label was 200 width by 50 height. Okay. So 200, twice as wide. If you look at it, this was 100 wide. So this is twice that. It's still the same height. We then set the font. Check that out. We set the label to Arial. We set the font to plain, and 32 is the size of the font. All right. And then we set the foreground. We set the color, the text color, to blue. So I don't know. What if I were to say like red here? Let's run it. Let's see what happens. I'll stop. It's going to be annoying having to wait all that time for it to run all over again. And the text showed up in red. Okay, so you can edit that however you want. I'll go ahead and put it back to blue. And then we added the components to the JFrame by once we created our label. Right, we created it. We set the sizes of them, of the button and the label, my components. And then from there, my components, I've added those components to the frame. You can create the components, but not add them, and they won't show up. And then we added an action listener, right? So it says hello button. We're accessing the hello button. We're adding an action listener and just some code that we ended up typing in here. And we used the action performed, and we created an event called an action event. And we set the text to hello world. Whoops. Down there. So once we clicked it, it set the label's text. It made a change. And at the very end, we set the frame's visibility to true. All right, so that was a lot, I know, but a lot of this is going to be copy and pasted when we actually add this in. So it says, can you add another button to it? Let's go ahead and add another button. So I'm going to go ahead here and we'll create a J button. And I'll just call this goodbye button because we have a hello button. And I'll say new J button. And then we will, let's see, I'll say click me again. Gotta spell click right. Click me again. And once I create this button, I'm going to go ahead and set the bound. So check this out. I'm going to copy exactly what I had before. I'm going to paste it. Instead of hello button, I'm just going to change this to goodbye button. It's not going to be at 100, 100. It's going to be at 100, 300. It's going to go down a little bit further, and we'll make it the same size. Then I'm going to add it to the frame. Frame.add goodbye button. And then we're going to create an action listener. I'm going to copy all this. And I'm going to paste it. And instead of hello button, it's going to be goodbye button. So we're adding an action listener, a new action listener. And I'll say action 2 performed. And why isn't it like this? Oh, the action performed class, action performed. And we'll keep that. And instead of saying hello world, I'll say goodbye world. All right. And let's see if there's anything else that wanted me to add. It says, can you add another button to it? And oh, it actually, I was even reading the bottom. Copy the action listener code and change it. So say goodbye instead of hello. I wasn't even looking at that, and I ended up doing that instead anyway. All right, let's run it. Let's see what happens. All right. So if I click on click me, it says hello world. If I click on this one, it says goodbye. Notice down here it says click m, and it just stops. I'm going to have to make that button a little wider. So the width of the button, goodbye button, it was just 150. Maybe I'll make it 150. And then also the label was 200. It wouldn't fit everything in there. So maybe I'll make the label, maybe I'll make it 400. Let's see. So set label, we'll make it 400 by 50. All right, we'll run this one more time. See what happens. Okay, so click me. It says hello world. Click me again. Goodbye world. And I could even play with this a little bit more and move this up a little bit because that button's kind of hanging off the page there. So maybe I go to my button and I'll say goodbye button. Instead of down 300, I'll say down 250, not 2,500. All right, I'm gonna run this one last time, hopefully, and we'll run it. Okay, so now I can see everything. Click me, it says hello world. Click me again, goodbye world. And notice I can click it and it just changes the text, the label that I originally had. All right, so if you want to just look at this code once more, we had our imports, we had our main method starting up here. We create our JFrame, and then inside the JFrame, well, we created buttons, 2 buttons and a label. We set the sizes of these components, and then we actually added them to the JFrame, and then we added 2 action listeners that waited for an event to actually take place and then to actually do something, right? The action performed was to set the text to hello world. The output label was to set text to this. I could have added anything I wanted, but this was just a simple example. All right, GUIs are not on the AP exam, but they're fun to play around with. And actually in the AP Computer Science Principles class, we use GUIs a lot, which is nice. All right, it looks like I've completed it. Mark is completed on the bottom, completed, well done. And that was 216 Java Swing GUIs.